It's the Fantasy Insiders College Football Show. We are working through some technical issues here, but thus is the internet age, right? That's how we live now, is working through technical issues. But we do have myself, Dan Trafford, and Joe DeSalva with you at the top here, the CFFsite.com. We're working to get Ben Pritchett on as well at Natural Slugger. But we will get Ben up and running. Don't you guys worry. We will have him on shortly as we work through some technical issues. What we're going to do at the top here is sort of lay the groundwork for the show as we get Ben up and have Joe go over some news and notes. And Joe, this is a busy off week and coming into the week where you have the Dalvin Cook news. Obviously, we got the Seth Russell news last week that will impact Baylor moving forward, not this week, obviously. You have Riker Fife with the news out of Nebraska. So there are a lot of moving parts here and there that will be part of the narrative as we move. Can you go over some of the news, the notes, the things that you think will influence this week's slate?
Yeah, the last couple of weeks we haven't, Dan, talked about a lot of injuries. As a matter of fact, we mentioned how light the injuries were, and then all of a sudden, just like that, boom, you mentioned, we don't even have Baylor on a slate this week, and if we did, we'd be probably having a 5-minute conversation about how that impacts Seth Russell's, going down, how his impact would be on the slate. But there's a bunch of injuries that are going to affect the way that some of these players, the way that you play some of these games. We'll just run down a bunch of them. It looks like Shea Fields for Colorado is still going to be out this week. He's still questionable at UCLA, so that still makes Nelson Spruce the number one option there, receiver for Colorado. You mentioned Dalvin Cook at the top of the show. Looks like he's doubtful. He's not going to play now. And then you have Mario Pender who's out as well. So, you've got Vickers and you've got Patrick, who probably going to be 1-2 for carries right there. And then you look at Iowa, right? Jordan Canzeri out with an ankle injury. Akram Wadley came in last time and filled in, scored 4 touchdowns. They get LaShawn Daniels back this week. It'll be interesting to see how much he gets used and how much of a workload Wadley gets. You got Leonte Carew, continuous ankle problems at Rutgers. I think a couple of big injuries. Zach Langer over there at Tulsa is a question mark, with his hamstring, and he's got a sweet matchup against SMU this week, so that one bears watching. You've got Paul Perkins, who it looked like was going to be out for a while, and what we're hearing is that he may come back and play this week for Colorado. It looks like it was going to be the Soso Jamoba show, and it looks like Paul Perkins may, in fact, wind up suiting up and playing this week against Colorado. The never-ending story about Corey Clement, I think right now we just put that one on the back burner. I think we stay away until we actually see him take the field. Over there in Arizona, you got the Nick Wilson situation. We're hearing as well that he's got some problems with his knee where he could be questionable this week. I think Jared Baker is probably going to get most of the carries, if not all of them, there in the backfield. You got Brad Kaya, the quarterback for Miami, is out against Duke this week. Jake Browning, quarterback for Washington, he's questionable with a shoulder injury. And then also you've got the Air Force game on one of the slates as well, and Shane DeVerne is questionable, which makes Jacoby Owens a really attractive play for Air Force. And that's a rundown of a ton of injuries that I think can impact the way that some of these lineups are built this week.
As we dive into the slate in just a few moments, we will try to get Ben back up and running as we get into some of these top plays. But I know that the Dalvin Cook and the Soso news both were rewrites for Ben as he talked through it, and that will certainly change what people are trying to construct and who top options are. We'll go through your start bench in a little bit, Joe, but from your perspective, as you guys are putting together your rankings and you're looking towards these slates and you're dealing, yes, Riker Fife does in fact hate the letter I. That is correct, Swag. That, or at least his parents did. He may not. He may like the letter I and just not have it as an option in his name. But we will keep an eye on these situations, but how much does it change what you do over at the CFF site as we bring in Ben Pritchett at Natural Slugger on Twitter, and of course the league college football analyst over at fantasyinsiders.com. He has given hell to Time Warner or Comcast or whoever it is that may be his internet service provider. And Ben has joined us here. Ben, we went over.
You gotta hit the music, man. When I come in like that, you gotta give me some I need some wrestler music, where the lights come out and they pop on and.
Yeah, yep, you're right.
I should have done that, man. I don't think think quite that far in ahead. I was just freaking out trying to figure out why my internet wasn't
If you
working.
had
But
brought the lights down in your office there and brought on like thrown on a black light, it probably would have set the mood for some music to be cued. But
man, I hate
maybe a
myself
different
right
show
now.
altogether there. That is for sure. Joe, as you're
Yep.
going through your rankings and you're trying to figure out, okay, Dalvin Cook this week, he's at the top of our list. Is it a mix and match with talent at Florida State, or is it simply reworking your entire process and trying to find where a guy slot now with someone like Cook already being out? And thank goodness we have this news in advance. This isn't a Saturday at 11:59 sort of news breaking that he's just not going to suit up and not going
Yeah.
to play. We have it in advance, but
Well,
from your
Dan,
side,
it makes it easier when it's the number one rated player, running back, at the top of the list. We just take them off there, and like we mentioned, you've got Vickers, you've got Patrick. Those guys are going to figure in somewhere. I think they're probably more of a daily play than they would be for some of these seasonal guys. I think where it would have made it a tough play if it would have been somebody like Samaje Perine going down, and then Joe Mixon affected as well. I think that would have thrown a little bit more of a monkey wrench into the rankings. When somebody like Dalvin Cook goes down, you just scratch him off the list, and everybody just moves up a slot until you get to about 60.
so, Ben, we touched on a lot of the injuries across college football. I mentioned the fact that your write up is simply in flux now with the Cook news and the other news going on throughout college football. From a writing perspective, tougher week this week than most. Easy. Well, how do you see this slate from a write up and from an analysis standpoint?
It is a different kind of slate. I think they're both going to be kind of different slates than what we've been used to because there's a lot of players that we kind of know what we're getting from them now, and so we're having to adjust for injuries and for freshmen coming in and things like that. But for the most part, you know what you're getting. You're trying to bank on either rebounds or emergencies or matchups. I mean, this is where we get into the grind. There's no like technical edge because anybody can look at a stats or game logs and see that Geronimo Allison gets a lot of catches and a lot of targets. I mean, it's easy to kind of figure that out, but you got to be able to look at it and determine if it's a good matchup. But yeah, I like this time. I didn't have the best week last week. I mean, as we're quick to point out on my hot take, not even getting a point, but he did drop a touchdown. It's going to be tougher to find that perfect lineup for sure.
We will take a look at the early slate. We'll touch on the late slate a little bit. Ben's write-ups will be available over on fantasyinsiders.com in short order on Friday for you to peruse and get ready for Saturday. If you're not yet a member, it's fantasyinsiders.com/plans to find out how to become a member of FI. And yes, Ben,
Can
the
we
floor
talk
record.
about the guy for 1 second that complained on Facebook about my article not being out until Friday morning, and he the week before used my article to win $15,000? That guy, I hope he's listening to this podcast because did not appreciate that one bit. Like, I mean, it's
So
tough to work around all these news and have a full-time job and everything else. But I thought it was really funny. The little complaint email was like, "Hey, you guys need to get your content out earlier." But yeah, by the way, I won the $25, which was like $15,000 last week. So I just laughed it off.
and he finished it with so there's that or something at the end that was just sort of a throw. It was impressive, and this is the world we live in now that people want everything now and they want it at the highest level. And Ben, what you produce, and Joe, what you guys produce over at the CFF site, and what FI does at such a high level is great content, and people get a little testy when it doesn't come in the same timeline that they expect. But Ben, if we dive into this early slate of games, um, it doesn't have Baylor, it doesn't have TCU. Obviously, TCU playing tonight. Two high-scoring offenses that we've been known to rely on for at least some part of our lineups over the past few weeks. We did mention the Seth Russell news, so maybe a blessing from a daily fantasy perspective that we don't need to try to figure out what's going to happen with Baylor this week. We'll have to worry about it next week. But What game are you targeting here? Is there one offensively that sticks out above the rest that you're looking at most of all, or is this sort of a balanced slate here in the early going that you feel like there are enough offensive options all around?
Well, that actually reminds me of your other question, that the differences in kind of this week and other weeks. There's more of an extreme difference from one site to the other this week than I've
Yep.
noticed since like maybe week one when we had the FCS games. I mean, it's the pricing difference on certain players is just so different, especially in wide receivers, that it's hard to. I'm going to be writing up a ton of wide receivers because it gets very site specific and like you were talking about games to target. Well, the Western Kentucky Old Dominion game is a game that you want to target. Obviously, Western Kentucky's playing out of this world, and they're playing an Old Dominion team that's falling apart. So they definitely are going to score a lot of points. And but Doty's only available on FanDuel, so you have to look
Yep.
at other options like the Oklahoma Kansas game, UCLA Colorado. Um, I actually think USC Cal has some sneaky chance for points. So those are kind of going to be the games that I look at. But when it comes to specific plays, there's going to be like you'll have to read my actual paragraphs upon paragraphs underneath the guy's name to get a feel of where I like them and where I don't like them.
Joe, how about yourself? Any games that stick out to you that you're keeping an eye on?
No, look, just to echo what Ben's saying, though, I mean, look, you go over to Tulsa SMU. That's a game that I really like. That could be a lot of points too, and that one's exclusive to DraftKings. So, and you don't get that one on FanDuel. So, like he said, I mean, you've got the Western Kentucky game, and I think South Florida Navy as well with the quarterback position with Quentin Flowers and Keenan Reynolds could be that's something that interests me as well. But like you said, it's site specific, and it's nice to see Western Kentucky on one. You've got Tulsa SMU on the other, so you definitely have a lot of variance this week.
Mm-hmm.
So Ben, let's dive in. Who are you liking at quarterback on this early slate?
Yeah, he hit on one of them. I like Keenan Reynolds. I like Brandon Doty. I like Baker Mayfield. We're going to kind of go against what I said last week was go with the running backs. Got lucky and hit that one, but I think this week with Kansas's pass defense being like fourth worst in FBS, I think it's safe to go back to what Oklahoma's been doing all year, which is that spread attack. So I think you're going to see them pass more. I don't think they're going to be relying so heavily on Pirine and Mixon. So I like Mayfield. I like Josh Rosen. He's been playing a lot better. Those are kind of the top tier guys I'm looking at. Kessler's going to squeeze in at the mid tier for me against Cal. The Cal's defense is starting to fall apart as they're getting into the meatier part of their schedule, and he's dealing with a lot. I mean, you're talking about a guy who came in as possibly a top first round pick quarterback, and he's lost his alcoholic coach. He's now dealing with some injuries at his wide receiver position. So like Kessler's had to deal with a lot of adversity. But I think that he has a lot of value on FanDuel where he's only 8,000. So he's a guy I'm going to be looking at. And then the biggest one that I want everybody to monitor for just general purposes is going to be the Texas A&M quarterback situation. Yep. Because we are going to be running into we'll know by tomorrow. So by the time the people are listening to this in podcast form, they're going to maybe know who the quarterback is, assuming right. Kevin Sumlin is a man of his word and actually tells us. But it could be one of three guys, and that throws everything into flux because if it is Kyler Murray against South Carolina's bad run defense, boy, man, he's so cheap on both sides that he's going to be a plug and play for me, especially on DraftKings where I have to have a second quarterback. I'm going to use him because I have full faith that he's going to get 100 yards. Kyle Allen, I have faith in to throw the ball. So I just think that I don't know much about Jay Kubanak other than he couldn't start at Oklahoma State. So I don't give him a whole lot. If he gets the job, I probably won't be looking at him, but he's cheap also. Other guys, Stave, Rippin, Blow for Purdue if you want to go really crazy. Walsh, Oklahoma State against Texas Tech's bad run defense if he's the red zone quarterback as a 4,800 punt number 2 quarterback for maybe DraftKings. I think that's maybe thinking way outside the box, but I mean, he put up like 4 or 5 touchdowns last week just working in that kind of situation. And his ability to run, he's like the number 1 option when they get into red zones. And then somebody's going to say Riker Fife, but I don't know about that one.
We touched on the injury news with Armstrong and Fife at the top. Joe, from the news perspective on Texas A&M, and we do
Yep.
believe that we'll have this news early if we're going to get it. But this feels as though this week, the way the news has been sort of slowly coming out from Texas A&M, that this is a bit of gamesmanship. But I don't know if that's going to be the case and if we're going to get the news tomorrow or not. But how do you track that sort of thing? And are there key sources here for you from a news tracking perspective that you can either share or at least say you have, so we can make sure to follow the CFF site on Twitter to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Fortunately for us and for everybody out there that follows us on Twitter or follows you guys as well, that's going to be big news. Okay, we get lucky because it's a big program. It's a big name program. And like Ben said, when the coach formally announces that there's going to be something announced on a Friday, all fantasy ears turn to that on Friday. And I agree with you. If I'm going to predict right now, and we're going to touch on it later in our start bench, I don't know. If I were to guess, I would say that Kyler Murray is going to be the guy on Friday. That's just my guess. I'm a little concerned even if you went Kyle Allen, like you said, Ben, because he's going to pass the ball well. But I'm so concerned that because they opened this competition up, that if he just looks bad for one series, that he gets a quick hook. I'm really concerned about that. But Kyler Murray at that price, gosh, dog, if he's named a starter, I don't know how you don't jump on him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing to keep in mind with a quarterback competition like that. How much of a leash do they have? How long is that leash, and how quickly will they make a change if they decide that the game's not going the way they want it to? Feels the college coaches carousel spins a lot faster than it does in the NFL. So
I'm going to jump in real quick, Dan, right here. And this is why I think this is a good spot if Kyler Murray is named the starter. I think whoever gets named the starter is going to be the starter for the foreseeable future, or at least for the short term, because they've got really three decent matchups coming up. If there's a change to be made right now, if you're Kyler Murray and you come in, man, he's got three really good matchups. I could see him taking and nailing this job down and staying with it for the rest of the season.
I will admit I'm somewhat disappointed, and correct me if I'm wrong, not seeing it on either slate. Didn't see it in research. The Cincinnati UCF game not available, and I know the American Conference, but UCF has been just so terrible on defense that I feel like almost anybody playing against them has the opportunity to throw up a great score, and especially Cincinnati's had some good run on offense as well. People in chat saying, Sean is saying in chat that they're frozen. I don't think we're frozen. I think we're still going strong here. Ben doesn't need to crash through another wall to make an entrance, so he will if he has to. For the good of the show, I know Ben will bring it, but believe we're going strong here. If you guys can see and hear us, give us a shout in chat there. Ben, looking at running backs, we've already touched on the news out of Florida State, and I think it is what it is at this point. Travis is good. Matt, you are not, and I assume Sean is not as well. Those are not good returns. And we're back. That's fantastic. I'm the only one you need to hear, Sean. Let's be honest. So we'll keep plugging forward here. But Ben, we moved past the Florida State news. We've talked on that enough. Running back. You mentioned last week was a little bit more of a focal point for you this week, moving away from that a tiny bit. But where do you like and what games are you focusing on from a running back perspective?
Here's the thing with the running back. You get a guy like Dalvin Cook, and you get so excited. And for me, that he's a FanDuel play. Obviously, $9,100 running backs on DraftKings aren't really an option anymore. It's just if you're doing that method, you're losing. You have to have like 300 yards, and it's just stupid. So don't do that method. If a running back is under 8K, I would say is when you start looking at him as options for DraftKings. Otherwise, don't look at him. But Dalvin Cook was like, I was so set on getting to use him this weekend, and that daggum hamstring, and that could bother him all year. And so I'm a little concerned just in general for the rest of the season with Dalvin Cook. He's just been so good even with the bum hamstring. It's just amazing. He's a freak. But I like McNichols for Boise State. You're talking about a guy who has scored 2 touchdowns in every single game this season. Nobody else has done that. He is the only guy that's done that. He's got 2 touchdowns in every game. So he's only $7,900 on DraftKings. He's significantly cheaper than Dalvin Cook, which we don't even get to use. But McNichols is a great option against a UNLV defense that has been bad against the run for years, not just this year, years. So I like McNichols. I like Wales. Obviously, Furby's coming back. He might actually be back for this game, and you'd have to have Joe tell you if he is back 100%. But I like Wales as an option against an Old Dominion team that struggles just against everything run and pass. So I like him. But in general, I'm going to be focusing on these mid-tier guys, the medium guys, the Zach Langer on DraftKings where he's only 5,400. He's back. He's healthy. A banger against an SMU defense that struggles just in general against the run. Saquon Barkley, I'm giving him a second chance. He screwed us last week. I'm okay with that. I can forgive and forget. That's part of college football daily fantasy. And so we're forgiving, we're forgetting, we're planning on him breaking off at least one or two big runs and getting over 100 yards this week, which he didn't do last week. Akram Wadley, he is the guy that's taking over the Kanzeri role, which means he's going to get north of 20 plus carries. And in this day and age of college football, a 20 plus carry running back in an offense that is built to run the football against a defense as bad as Maryland is a bargain. And he is cheap on both sides at 5,700 on DraftKings and 6,800 on FanDuel. I was hoping to get to use Soso Jamebo, but we're now looking at Paul Perkins as being a probable, which throws everything into flux because Paul Perkins theoretically is a great play. Like the Colorado run defense is allowing 209.5 yards per game. But now we're like dealing with, well, is Perkins really healthy? Is this just smoke and mirrors? Because if there's anybody you can hate in college football, it's Jim Mora, because he is a conniving coach when it comes to releasing information, and this all could be one big smoke screen, and we might actually see Perkins play, and that scares me because if you're going to invest the amount of salary that you have to play Perkins, you could get screwed. You could be rewarded with 150 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. So that scares me. Jamebo actually might be still a safe play. I just wish he was cheap. He's just not really that cheap. 5,300 and 6,200 on FanDuel. That's not that cheap. So if you're looking in that range, I'd rather you shift your focus to Newbie of Nebraska, who's going up against a Purdue team that's allowing about the same amount of yards per game as Colorado, but people don't think about Purdue as a bad run defense. So Newbie, if he actually gets the carries, which Mike Riley's a dumb coach, so I don't know for sure that he's going to get 20 carries. I think he's maybe got 20 carries one time this whole year. But assuming he does, he's got a great matchup and he's super cheap, especially on FanDuel if you're trying to wiggle in salary. And there's plenty of other cheap options, which I feel like I'm covering a lot of the guys. I want to shift over to Joe and let him cover some guys. But there's going to be a lot of cheap guys that I really like as punts on DraftKings, which has become the necessary evil. You have to have one or two 4,000 to 5,000, maybe even 3,500 running back on DraftKings to be successful week in, week out. Go, Joe.
Yeah, look, the one thing that I'll jump in and say, if there's one lesson that we learn in college football is we talk about it every week about the injuries, right? I mean, look, Corey Clement we thought he's going to play now for a couple of weeks. So, the whole Paul Perkins news, same thing. It looks like he's going to be, at least we hear, and he's probable. I think at this point, and Ben, you might go ahead, you might agree with it. Whenever you have those question marks up on the board, I think you just got to shy away because you can really get burned by those guys. Just because sometimes you don't get really solid news. I mean, this isn't the NFL, right? It's college. These coaches play coy. But, I'll throw out a couple of more names as well, or even just throw some that you mentioned. I love Wales, over on FanDuel for 7,500. I like Barkley on both sites. Wadley looks like, he's going to get 20-plus carries. But remember, LaShawn Daniels does come back this week. I'd be curious to see how he factors into this, but I do think Wadley's going to get the majority of the carries. I have Newbie on both sites. And I even think over there on DraftKings, a guy like Brandon Wilds, who came back and ran for 100-plus against Vanderbilt last week, plays against A&M this week. I think Trey Carson's is a decent play at 4,500. And look, we talked about it before we went on the air. Marcus Marshall, Georgia Tech, he's 5,500 on FanDuel this week. I love Marcus Marshall. He had a tough matchup last week against Florida State. I think that's a good value for him.
Now, a question in the chat earlier isn't specific to plays this week, but from Mike Rubin asking a lineup construction question if you're playing multiple lineups or single lineups. Now, a point of clarification, I know, Ben, you can speak better to your own play, but you are more of a tournament player You look to construct a few different lineups that you like a lot and then play them in a couple of different places. Personally, I am a single lineup guy when I can. If I don't feel comfortable with that single lineup, I'm not playing cash games. I'll play more GPPs and try to build things around to get more exposure to guys. But when I can, I like to lock down one lineup, and Ben's write-up typically allows me to do that and feel comfortable in picking up players and being comfortable with them. But Ben, to your roster construction, to your tournament play, if you want to expand on that slightly before we hit wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that's like the most common question that people ask when it pertains to any daily fantasy sports. Being in the business for a few years now, as somebody becomes more in tune with playing daily on a regular basis, you come from the NFL spot where you kind of know what you're doing, and then you come to college football and you're maybe just seeing my write-ups and trying to figure out, what is a good play and what's the best mix. And here's why I only play tournaments. The way I look at a slate is so broad, and I try to do that on purpose so that I can cover as many great elements as possible, that I have trouble focusing in on, a singular lineup. So when I'm way better, and it took me a year plus to figure this out, I'm way better at spreading 5-6 lineups and hitting it that way, especially on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, I usually do like 3. But I do better if I spread out my lineups. It's just the way I look at things, my personal brain, the way it works. It just doesn't zone in well on one lineup. You get a guy like Tuttle, Mr. Tuttle 05, Dan Gaspar. His brain works best as a brain that just hones in on one lineup. And that's why he's so successful with like the single bullet tournaments, with the head-to-head action and things like that. So it's just kind of, you got to learn what you're best at and how your brain processes work the best. I've actually seen that there are people that read my write-up that do better than other people that read the write-up, and it's just because of the way they process information. Like, there's a Pugfather guy. He's won every single week because he processes information. I can guarantee you my write-up hasn't been great every single week. It hasn't. But he has won every single week because he can read the write-up the way he learns. It just works better that way.
Well, and I think to that point, we can get off this topic quickly here, but it's no one source is always going to give you all the information. You need to be able to process it, as you said, and kind of learn to fish rather than be given the fish, to use the old cliche there. But Ben's write-up will give you a lot of fish to eat up front, to make a bad analogy there. But moving on to wide receiver.
Did you just compare me to Jesus?
Maybe. I mean, I didn't do it intentionally.
The bread and the mini fish, I'm giving them out to everybody. It's never ending.
You have the wine. It's the wine that kicked it off. So
I do. I'm getting a little low. We need another technical difficulty so I can go take care of that.
So let's touch on wide receiver here. As we mentioned, no TCU, no Baylor in this slate. That's where I've been comfortable at least getting a top tier or second wide receiver on most weekends, locking in a Doxson or somebody from Baylor and feeling comfortable that I'm going to get production there. Wide receiver this week for you, Ben. What do you see, and where are you at least starting your research? As I know you're still knee deep in writing up wideouts this week.
Yeah, I haven't actually gotten to the write-up of this guy, but I don't have to do that to know that he's the top wide receiver play, and that's Keiaris Garrett. You're talking about a guy who is coming into this game. He's lost Atkinson. Okay, that's bad. He's lost Kevon Lucas. Okay, in a normal system that would concern me maybe, but he had 14 catches for 268 yards and 3 touchdowns last week against Memphis. He has consistently produced every single week. Right. And now he's going to be even more targeted. I mean, he was already getting the lion's share of the targets. He's going to get even more in this matchup against SMU, who just are pathetic defensively. So Garrett is to me head and shoulders above everybody else. Now you have guys like Tywan Taylor for FanDuel. Again, you can't use Garrett on FanDuel, so you have to be looking at Taylor or even Dangerfield if you're feeling a little frisky, because Dangerfield was the guy. Taylor has become the guy. Juju Smith, I think, has a good matchup against Cal. Sterling Shepard, obviously, anybody with Oklahoma against Kansas is a good matchup. So if you're looking as an expensive play on FanDuel, you can't use Garrett. I'm sorry, but look at Taylor, Shepard, and Schuster. But I think this is where, when we talked about earlier, this is where it's going to get complicated when you have to be site specific when it comes to the mid-tier and below wide receivers, because there's just so many that are mispriced. You have Allison, who's 5,100 on DraftKings, but 7,100 on FanDuel. Tough matchup against Penn State, but he gets so much volume and he has so much potential for double-digit catches that he has value on DraftKings that he would not have on FanDuel at 7,100. Artavis Scott is the opposite. He's 6,400 on DraftKings. The matchup's not great, but he's 6,100 on FanDuel. You're talking about a guy who is the top passing catching option on his team, is a threat for 100 plus yards any single game. Just a very cheap way to get a very talented receiver. Lawler is the same way. He's cheap on both sides, though. I don't know why he's priced so cheap. He's very touchdown dependent, but he's gotten 26 red zone targets this season. I think the next closest guy on his team is like 6 or 7. It's sick the way that you have to find these value plays, and with Lawler, you're going to come into a decision. Well, do I use Lawler or Scott? This might be one of those slates where you use a lot of you just fill out your lineup with 3 mid-tier wide receivers or cheaper. Maybe you don't have to use the expensive guys, and you just have to tinker with your lineup in the best way possible, because there's not really a whole lot of expensive running backs either. So I don't know, Joe. What's your opinion on this?
You know what? Look, it depends on what site you play. I mean, obviously, Taywan Taylor and Kearis Garrett are the top one, depending on which site you play. But if you want to, look, I do like Juju Smith-Schuster. I do like him this week. And if you want to go a little bit farther down the list, I think Thomas Spurbeck at Boise State is a nice, solid play. And somebody that's caught over 100 yards for 3 consecutive weeks and has scored a touchdown. Laquan Treadwell over there at Ole Miss. If you want to keep riding his wave, you can certainly do that. But, I'll throw in a few more for you as well, because you mentioned Dangerfield. I mean, you can go ahead and stack Dangerfield and Taywan Taylor if you want. I think D.D. Westbrook at 5,600 on FanDuel's got a lot of value. And I think David Glidden on both sides, considering that Oklahoma State plays Texas Tech, has a lot of value this week. And then I'll even throw out Cortland Sutton playing against Tulsa, 4,900 over there on DraftKings. And Danny Anthrop's at 3,500 for Purdue playing against Nebraska this week.
A lot of
and
names.
D'Angelo Yancey. You have to mention D'Angelo Yancey whenever you mention Purdue receivers, because he is he is the last time that I totally screwed up big time royally. I don't think he was a cover boy, but I might have made him a cover boy last year when I thought he was going to have he has these unbelievable measurables, and he follows me on Twitter, and I went all crazy in on him, and he made me look stupid. So, D'Angelo Yancey's only 3,300 on DraftKings, but I'm not actually going to use him. I'm with him on Anthrop, but I had to throw that in there.
Some questions coming into chat. Obviously, the question about Atkinson, Ben, you already answered that one of questionable, but Alex Erickson was dynamite last week. Looking at him again from Max Pincus. Who is Alex Erickson playing this week? What team is...
Erickson's playing.
That's a rhetorical question.
I'm stupid. I fell for that. I just walked right into that.
You did. It was.
You did.
I owe Max a beer now for setting up that question for me. But Rutgers secondary is terrible, so wide receivers are going to have their time there, and I will admit that regularly. That's going to be an ugly game with Rutgers going into Wisconsin, into Madison, so I would not be against any Wisconsin offensive players. If you get some more news, I know Clement, that whole situation is in flux, and Joe, you talked about it at the top, but that is going to be a game. He's an elite play. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Anybody else wide receiver? You guys touched on a ton of names there. Seems like some of the old standbys and Treadwell and Spurbeck and guys that we know in this mid-tier, but we don't need
you need to throw in a couple other cheap options, because that's been our biggest complaint that I've seen people have is when they go finish, they can make out most of their roster positions except for the very end.
3,500 or
The
4,000 guys.
very
Yep.
last guy, it seems like we've been.
Well, you know what's crazy is that we don't have a Look, I've thrown out Malachi Jones now for about 3 weeks in a row, and he's scored every week. We don't have him on the slate this week, so I'm not going to use him. But I'll throw out Ricky Seals-Jones too. I know there might be a change at quarterback for A&M, but he's on a little 2-game run right now where he seems to be picking up a little bit.
Okay, hush, Joe. So back to what I was saying. We're talking like these guys. I want people to go read Jordan Case's article. We've moved him to this punt play article that's going to combine both the slates, and we feel like that maybe this is more of a needed thing. So go read Jordan's article. It should be out sometime very soon if it's not already posted on the site, which will highlight the guys that are super cheap punts that to help fill in. I added some guys like Parmalee for Kansas, who's been really good all year. Pearson L for Nebraska is a super talent that hasn't gotten fully healthy yet. I think he might be getting there. But other than that, just go read the article.
Always good over at fantasyinsiders.com. Jordan Case, one of the college football writers. Tons of content there. If we're touching on tight end here, Ben, quickly, I know there's been the change in prices on FanDuel where you have the big drop down to 2,000 for some tight ends. Do you see somebody who stands out above the rest dependent on price tag if you're playing over on FanDuel and have to roster a tight end?
Yeah, I think Steven Anderson sticks out. And the reason why he's not getting the red zone targets, we already talked about who's getting the red zone targets in this offense. But USC has had struggles with the tight end and defending the tight end. If you look back over their game logs, Austin Hooper had 4 catches for 79 yards for Stanford and a touchdown. Josh Perkins of Washington had his best game of the season, 4 catches, 57 yards and a touchdown. Idaho's tight end, Deion Watson, 6 catches for 66 yards. So you're dealing with a guy who's been progressively getting better in Steven Anderson, who is finally labeled as a tight end. We get to use him as a tight end this year. Last year he was a wide receiver and he was so successful. I actually think he could definitely have a good game here. He's 3,900 and he's battling at that same level Jalen Samuels, and so he's kind of more of a GPP option because of that, because most people are going to fade towards Jalen Samuels, who's been ridiculously successful all year and is very safe even against Clemson. But I think that's where you look at the expensive guys. Other than that, I don't see any cheap options. Joe, help me out. I don't see any guys under 2.9.
No, I don't even know how you steer off of Steven Anderson. If you ask me, with Higbee possibly not even playing. I mean, the only other option that I would throw out is a name that I threw out last week is Jordan Leggett at Clemson, just because he's scored in like 3 or 4 straight games, and you got a chance of getting a touchdown. But right now, from a volume standpoint, I don't think there's anyone on the list better than Steven Anderson right now.
I think the sneaky guy is going to be like a Fumagalli or an Ingram, but both those guys are 3,500, so they're not that much difference than Steven Anderson.
Right.
But if you need the 400 to move around, but we just talked about it. You're mainly looking at tight ends on FanDuel. I mean, of course, people look at them as punts on DraftKings, but if you're looking at them as tight ends on FanDuel, you're going to be able to save in the wide receiver. We just talked about all that. So you may just have to take the necessary evil and spend up for your tight end, and there's plenty of them. Over 3,200.
Let's quickly touch here, Ben, on some of your top plays in the late slate. We don't have to dive in too deep here. I know your research is still ongoing there. The write-up will be coming for the late slate later on Friday, hopefully within 24 hours, or we'll get more Facebook messages that we'll have to respond to.
It'll be up tomorrow morning. I don't want a revolt from the guy who's rolling around in his hundreds
off of the write-up from the week before. But we can move on from there. Ben, just a couple of names here, guys, that you're starting to at least research and perhaps build your rosters around. And shortly, we will get to the start sit with Joe and Ben's hot take, which will be a little bit hotter than last week.
I don't know what that means. Are you saying it's going to be worse than last week? Because I don't think it can be worse. Let's just put it that way. Hey, I did throw in at the very end. Who did I throw in as was going to be a better play than? Oh, Burbridge was going to be better than Coleman, which he was. So I did hit that barely. Yeah, I think this late slate has some good options. I mean, if you watch Draft Twitter, you see a different quarterback listed as the top quarterback every single week, it seems like. And their love affair has moved to Paxton Lynch. So Paxton Lynch has a good matchup against Tulane. I actually think that this is really good for him, a good spot for him. I think he could have a really nice game. We were talking about before the show, and I think Joe might agree with me. I'm looking more to punt quarterback, especially on DraftKings, where I know I'm going to want to spend up for my running backs, because I think McCaffrey has a sick matchup. I mean, it's luscious, it's beautiful, it's wonderful against Washington State. Even though it's on the road, I mean, he's getting so many carries and so many touches, and he's taking over like we thought he would early in the year. He's just become this enigma and is on his way to possibly being there for a Heisman. So I love his matchup. The Notre Dame Temple game is weird. I want to get guys in that game, but with both defenses being extraordinarily good, there's going to be a player that emerges. It could be Procise. It could be Fuller. I don't know who it's going to be, but I'm not going to touch that game. So that's another one that you want to look at, but not not mess with unless you're playing GPPs. Tennessee against Kentucky. Joe, what do you think about going a little Dobbs action? He's only 8,200 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I do. I do like Dobbs. I'm looking at some of the other quarterbacks and some of these matchups, and one thing that I'll throw out there as well is you got Houston Vanderbilt, right? I mean, Houston's the fourth highest scoring offense in the FBS, but we talked a few weeks ago about Vanderbilt. Their defense isn't bad. I think that's something that you got to be really careful about. And I'm down here in New Orleans, and I'll tell you, they're over there in Houston right now, and there's slated to be a bunch of bad weather this weekend, and that could factor into the way you construct your lineup. And I'm telling you, the combination of the Vanderbilt defense and possible rain going into that Houston area for that game, that's something that you guys need to really monitor as you're constructing these lineups.
Agree. I'm with him 100% on that.
You're talking in the chat about the Baylor weather and what happened there, but always good to keep an eye on it and how it will affect the passing game and what you can get out of an offense when big rainstorms or torrential downpours are in the forecast. Joe, let's get ready for the start sit. Ben, any other names for this late slate that you feel are going to be in your write-up or at least on the periphery right now of guys you're starting to research?
I know I'm going to look at doing a GPP with McCaffrey and Booker as my running backs, but I think Hurd is a very capable guy on FanDuel where he's only 6,500. He's like a really nice play there. Quarterback, I don't know if we talked about it, but there's a lot of moving pieces there. Lanning for Iowa State's taking over. He's super cheap. Tolles is super cheap. I'm not sure I would go that direction. Malik Rozier is taking over for Kaya for Miami. Not gonna touch that one. If I was doing a start sit, I would sit that one. But he is a dual threat quarterback and is super cheap if you want to look at that. Shermer's taking over for Vanderbilt at Houston, but he just touched on the weather situation. Shermer's a freshman, highly touted freshman, arguably one of the more touted Vanderbilt incoming freshmen that they've ever had. I don't know why they didn't push him in earlier when McCrary was doing awful, but another guy, a moving piece. But most of all, quarterbacks, if we'll just stick with quarterbacks. Otherwise, just read the write-up. Jared Hurd against Iowa State is one of the more fascinating plays. And I'm not backing this play at all when it comes to like cash games. But I love the idea of him as long as Swoops doesn't come in and steal 3 rushing touchdowns again. And that's always what we're going to deal with him, which is why he's always going to be a GPP until they give us an idea of the different of any other way they're going to do things. But for the most part, I'm looking more at Paxton Lynch at my quarterback there.
Get Ben's right up on fantasyinsiders.com on Friday. It'll be out 24 hours before lineup lock to keep all of the trolls on Facebook away. Joe, we are now ready for your start sit, and then we'll come back to Ben for his hot take of the week. And we'll be back with you next Thursday here on the College Football Spreecast. This will be available on iTunes and on YouTube as well for your listening and viewing pleasure, or whatever you make of this show. And we will be back with you each week throughout the college football season. Joe, are you ready? Ben and I are going to put our seats in the lock position and sit back and enjoy. So the floor is yours.
Hey, let's go ahead and do this. Look, week 9, okay? And if for you season-long guys, we are really coming down to the home stretch. And for you daily guys, I mean, we're right in the middle of the grinder. So here we go. We're going to start it out with our underperformers, overperformers, looking at the guys that we have already ranked up on the CFF site. But, after second thought and some other considerations, I have some questions as well. And, a couple of guys at each position that I think you need to be a little careful of this week. That may not live up to their rankings. We have Greg Ward at Houston up at 17. He goes against Vanderbilt's defense and possible weather, complications in that game. I'd caution fantasy owners for that. And for the same reason, Jeff Driscoll for Louisiana Tech, they play in at Rice, same general location in Houston. We have Driscoll as a number 10 quarterback. Weather could affect his ranking this week as well. You got Zach Langer, the number 16 running back in our list over there at Tulsa, but he has had injuries, and you're wondering if anything's going to be nagging. I think you may be taking a little bit of a gamble if you put a lot on the line with him. Ben said, he could be 100% healthy, but the way that we get news now, I don't know if that's ever a for sure thing until we see these guys on the field. And Akram Wadley, number 18 running back at Iowa. Be careful. I don't know how much LaShawn Daniels is going to get used, but we are confident that Wadley is going to be the guy. Wide receivers, DeMarcus Ayers, Houston, Trent Taylor, Louisiana Tech, goes in hand with what we said about the weather guys. Overperformers, guys that we think could outperform their numbers. And look, we're going to go with Dane Evans. Last week we said to Benjamin, he went off like a monster. I mean, he made us look bad. But we have him at number 23 this week. We think against SMU with Kieres Garrett, like you mentioned, Ben, he could go off this week. And Kyler Murray, we have at 53. But if he gets named the starter tomorrow, guys, he's going to be way higher than his 53 ranking that we have him right now. And 2 running backs. We didn't touch on them on the late slate, but they're on the late slate. Myles Gaskin, running back, Washington, we have at number 34. And Jacoby Owens, Air Force, number 54. We think both of those guys can outperform where we have them ranked. And then wide receiver, Jared Dangerfield, Western Kentucky, and Teddy Veal. Remember that name, Teddy Veal, Tulane wide receiver, going up against Memphis this week. There's your list of underperformers, overperformers, week 9. And here we go with the start bench. And guys, we're going to start with the bench list, and we're going to start right there at Texas A&M. We've been talking about the quarterback situation all throughout the show. Kyle Allen, he was abysmal last week against Ole Miss. He only completed 12 of 34 passes, 88 yards. He was replaced late in the fourth quarter. Head coach, someone announced that a decision is going to be made on Friday on a starting quarterback. You know what? I would think that even if Allen is the starter, he's going to be on a very tight leash. I'm shying away from Kyle Allen altogether. Week 9 against South Carolina. Put him on your bench this week. Perry Ellis, quarterback, Maryland, playing at Iowa. Perry Hills. I'm sorry, Perry Ellis. I think I'm talking start bench with clothing, guys. Hills has passed at least 1 touchdown, run for a touchdown, and surpassed 120 rushing yards in back-to-back games against Ohio State and Penn State. But, this week the Terrapins travel to Iowa and face one of the nation's best defenses. The Hawkeyes are ranked 10th in the nation in scoring defense, 12th in points allowed per game, and 3rd in rushing yards allowed per game. Perry Hills, quarterback, Maryland, we're calling for a week 9 bench. We're going to go back to the Houston game. A guy you've liked over the last couple of weeks, Ben, Kenneth Farrow. Now, we believe that starting quarterback Greg Ward is possibly a start in week 9, but we can't say the same for Kenneth Farrow. The Commodores are only giving up 110 yards per game on the ground, and they've only allowed a total of 5 rushing touchdowns this year. Now, unlike Greg Ward, who can improvise in the pocket and create, rushing yards by getting out in the passing game, Farrell has to produce from the read option, and making him a little bit more of a risky play against a Vanderbilt defense that's allowed fewer than 17 points per game. We think he's a risky play this week, especially if the weather's bad. Kenneth Farrell, we're calling for a week 9, and that's a rare bench. Kenneth Farrell, week 9 bench, Houston versus Vanderbilt. Joseph Yearby, running back, Miami. Duke's allowing 130 rushing yards per game, but Yearby has a handful of factors working against him in week 9. First of all, the Canes are going to be without quarterback Brad Kaya. We mentioned that at the top of the show. He suffered a concussion last week. Second, Miami just fired Al Golden, so we're concerned the team's just not ready to pick up the pieces and deliver on a road game against a quality opponent. And then lastly, the Duke run defense is tied for 5th in the FBS in allowing touchdowns. They've only allowed 4 this year, guys. 4 touchdowns allowed in 2015. We just think all of that is a recipe for disaster to start Joseph Yearby, week 9 bench at Duke. And then we're just going to touch on it real quick. Nick Wilson, Arizona, we had a big write-up. We'll put it on the site later this week. It looks like there's another injury concern for him with his knee. I think Jared Baker's going to get a majority of the touches. I'd stay away from Nick Wilson this week and call for a bench in week 9. Now, we're going to hop over to the starts. That's where we're going to close it out. We've got about six names for you, and we're going to start with Greg Ward in Houston. He leads an offense that's 4th in the FBS in scoring. But, in week 9, the Cougars host Vanderbilt, a team amongst the best in the FBS in allowing points. They're only allowing about 16 per game. Now, fantasy owners can't expect 35 to 40 points from Ward, but he should be able to improvise from the pocket and accumulate enough fantasy points with his legs and his arms to warrant starting as a quarterback too. And that's key. He may not be a good daily play, and he may not be a good play for you guys that need one quarterback. But if you're playing with dual quarterbacks, Greg Ward's a start this week in week 9. Terrell Newby, running back Nebraska, playing at Purdue. Newby has only topped 100 yards rushing in a game twice this year. But in week 9, he faces a Purdue defense that is allowing nearly 200 yards per game on the ground, which is worse than the Big Ten. That calls for Terrell Newby to start week 9 at Purdue. Peyton Barber, running back Auburn, playing Ole Miss. Ben, you mentioned, I saw you on Twitter, can Barber bulk carry his way to 100 yards? You thought he could. We do too. One thing's for sure. Barber's going to get a lot of work. He's averaging 29 carries in the last 4 games and has scored 11 of the team's 14 offensive touchdowns in Auburn's previous 3 games. He gets a lot of touches, and if Auburn punches it in the end zone, there's a good chance Barber's going to be on the end of that. Week 9 start, Peyton Barber at home against Ole Miss. Brandon Wilds, running back South Carolina. We touched on him a little bit earlier in the show, playing at Texas A&M. After missing 3 games due to injury, Wilds returned last week to run for 119 yards and a 19-win over Vanderbilt. Well, in week 9, he'll face a Texas A&M defense that's allowing 200 yards per game on the ground, which is tied for last in the SEC. We like Brandon Wilds as a week 9 start for South Carolina at Texas A&M. Jacoby Owens, running back Air Force. Owens ran for a season-high 137 yards last week in a win against Fresno State. And in fact, it was the first time all season the junior back topped 100 rushing yards in a game. Well, in week 9, the Falcons traveled to Hawaii, and Owens could be aligned for his second 100-yard game of the year, going against the 13th worst run defense in the FBS. That's right. Hawaii's allowing 228 yards per game. Shane DeVerne, another running back, also questionable in that game. Jacoby Owens should be in your starting lineup week 9. Wayne Gallman, 2 more names for you guys. Wayne Gallman, running back Clemson. Last time Gallman faced one of the nation's top rushing defenses, Boston College, in which we called for a bench that week. You hit it on the head. He failed to reach the 50-yard mark, but we think he's worth a roster spot this week against an NC State defense ranked in the top 20 against the run, because in 3 conference games, the opposing team's leading rusher has averaged 97 yards per game on the ground and has scored at least 1 touchdown against the Wolfpack defense. That's right. We think that defense padded their stats by their non-conference slate the first 4 games of the year, and Wayne Gallman should be a week 9 start for you, Clemson at North Carolina State. And it wouldn't be the weekly start bench if we didn't end it with a freshman, so I saved this freshman for the end. Marcus Marshall, Georgia Tech. I already mentioned earlier we liked his value on one of the sites. Well, you know what? He led all Georgia Tech running backs last week in carries in the 22-16 upset of Florida State. We believe the freshman's role will be just as big, if not bigger, in week 9 when Georgia Tech travels to Virginia to face a defense that has given up over 160 yards per game on the ground. To end it, we'll go with another freshman, Marcus Marshall, running back Georgia Tech at Virginia. And that sums up your week 9 start bench, guys.
Great stuff, Joe. Ben, we'll come to you on your hot take in a moment. Travis does have the question here. Do we even mess with Clement this week, even if he starts? Joe, I know your opinion is when guys are question marks, you stay away. I would assume here, Ben, his price tag just isn't cheap enough to run the risk of him not getting a full workload. But what's your take on Clement if he does suit up and play against a Scarlet Knight defense?
I'm fine with it on DraftKings. I'm not fine with it on FanDuel. He's priced up there with all the other elite backs. So, although I think he's as talented as anybody in college football, I just don't think you can take that chance on him at 7,300 on FanDuel.
Great. I think it is time for your hot take. Then we can say good night and push this out to YouTube and to iTunes and get ready for Saturday, a day full of college football. So, Ben, who are your plural or your singular? Who are the hot takes this week?
I've been really successful going wide receivers and saying this wide receiver is going to be better than another wide receiver, but I don't think I'm going to do that. If I were to do that, so we're going to do a bonus hot take at the end, and I think I have one. But my hot take is going to be Terrell Newby. And what we're going to say about Terrell Newby, he's facing Purdue in Purdue. I am going to say that he busts out. He had 198 yards earlier in the season against South Alabama. He's facing a defense that is allowing 198 yards per game and 4.8 yards per carry. Assuming Newby gets 20-plus carries, which I am, he's been getting a steady diet of carries all season. I am going to project him to hit 200 yards rushing in this game and go past the average that Purdue is allowing per game as Nebraska goes on to win this game. They have a question at the quarterback situation. I'm going to put a caveat on this. This is all assuming that Tommy Armstrong is playing at quarterback. If he's not, that is going to change a little bit of if he can get to 200 yards. I still think he has a really good game. I think he's priced really cheap. So this hot take's more about ownership than anything. But I do like him, and I think 200 yards is well within his grasp. My other hot take, my side hot take, my wide receiver over wide receiver hot take is going to be Alex Erickson is going to have more fantasy points. Oh, I got to pick a guy. Joe, give me a guy. Who is Alex Erickson going to have? Top tier, top guy. Who's he going to have more points than? Just give me a guy.
Every single other wide receiver.
How about Leonte Carew?
Oh, that's easy. That's too easy. I'm going to say he has more points than Juju Smith, Thomas Burbeck, and Sterling Shepard. So 3 wide receivers. I think he has more points than all 3 of those.
I think those are all hittable marks this week with how porous that defense is, and I'll get to watch another Big Ten trouncing of the Scarlet Knights. Fantastic. With that said, gentlemen, great stuff as always. You can find Joe on Twitter and the college football site at the CFF site. Ben at Natural Slugger. Find me if you're looking for me at Dan Stratford. Of course, Fantasy Insiders at Fantasy Insiders on Twitter and fantasyinsiders.com/plans. If you're not yet a member, we'll be back with you next Thursday right here at 11 p.m. Eastern Time to talk some more college football. Best of luck on Saturday, and we'll talk to you then.